Good morning, everybody. People are slowly loading themselves up on the system. Thank you very much for coming along today. We've got a few people coming through, as I can see, slowly loading themselves up on the system. My name's Alan Rides. I'm the Managing Director of Hounslow Chamber of Commerce in West London Local Chambers. And I'd like to welcome you all very much to today's webinar. Today we have some guest speakers of Simon Ray Scott from Connect Works, Linda Bazant talking all about Incoterms, and William Morrison, our key speaker, talking all about VAT for trade and exporting to the EU. Would you like to please turn your cameras on? Okay. Thank you very much for joining us all. So today's webinar is going to talk about Incoterms 2020 and what changes there have been in those and how that affects your trade with the EU. Once upon a time, exporting or sending your goods off to Bristol, Basingstoke or Bradford was the same as sending them to Barcelona. But things have changed quite a bit, as we're all beginning to learn. We have with us some wonderful speakers today who will talk about the different aspects of those Incoterm changes and how they affect VAT, which can be quite a dramatic impact when you have your goods arrive in Europe or now in the UK from what you were previously being expected to pay. So I'm going to ask our first speaker of the morning to say a few key words, which is going to be Simon Ray Scott, who is going to set the scene a little bit for us with a little analogy of what's happened since we've voted to leave the EU, what's happened in the transition period, and perhaps where we are today and some of the concerns that a lot of people have got and the issues that they're currently facing. Simon, would you like to say a few things? Thank you very much for coming today. Don't forget to turn yourself off mute.
We all do it. I don't know what it is. My apologies to everybody for that blip of silence. Just to say a few words about how I know Alan and why I was invited on. He and I are both members of Hammersmith and Fulham's business network. And I think Alan perhaps was tempted to have me on because I am not frightened of speaking up about my feelings about the lack of wisdom of entering into the Brexit process. And it's not always a welcome thing to be saying or to be talking about. But I'm going to be as neutral as I can in presenting my overview of where we are, what the issues are, and why Alan has so wisely chosen the speakers that he has for this morning. So just a little bit on where I think we are now. We've got the impacts of the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and the Withdrawal Agreement landing. Now, there was, of course, drama at the beginning of January, but essentially, it has not all happened yet. Things are going to happen over a period of time. The impacts are going to grow in their severity. And I think the thing that I'm really worried about is that the removal of our role in European supply chains, that's both imports and exports, is progressively going to be frozen out. And I think we're going to need to think very carefully about that. The other two key elements of where we are now is that we're beginning to understand the impacts of economic gravity. You trade, essentially, the pattern is clear over the centuries, you trade locally first. And of course, Europe is 30 miles away, and places like Japan and Australia are significantly further away. Some people might feel, but we do have effective trade with Japan. Our effective trade with Japan is largely Japanese companies setting up in the United Kingdom, and they largely set up in the United Kingdom because we were the gateway to Europe. And you only have to look at the Honda plant in Swindon that a year ago was just about to introduce electric car production as its primary electronic car production, electric vehicles. The goods were actually on a ship traveling to the UK, and it was turned around. I think they are now going to close the Swindon branch, aren't they? I think they will be moving to parts of the EU where they can effectively do business. So gravity is a serious factor in all of this. I think the key thing, though, is that what we have done in leaving the customs union and the single market is that we have introduced friction into trade. And if I can pick up on this point about friction, I think many people, perhaps some obvious examples were people in the fishing industry, thought that replacement of our European Union membership, the single market and the customs union, with a TCA, a free trade agreement, would mean that things could go on just as they were before. Because essentially what they were thinking about was that no tariffs, no extra import costs, export tariffs on the trade, all will be fine. But of course, it's not just tariffs, it's the non-tariff barriers that are the killers. And the primary friction that's coming in, so I don't want to introduce fictions here, let's not go down that route, that's not neutral. But the key thing is that we've introduced friction because of the non-tariff barriers. And much of what's going to be discussed this morning is about the non-tariff barriers. So we're starting to feel the full impact of being a third country to the EU. And you can see how the terms, the trading terms of being a third country are affecting us. Let's go back to the fishermen, and perhaps particularly the shellfish issue, the fact that we have grade B waters and the shellfish needs to be purified, purage arrangements, and they have been done in the EU. So that trade has come to an end because of terms of trade, things written into the third country arrangement. The reasons for leaving the SM and the CU, perhaps particularly the CU, were to enable us to trade elsewhere. The seduction of an American, a US trade deal. The argument was that we wouldn't diverge, everything would stay the same. The only logic of leaving the single market and the CU, of course, is to diverge. And there's news today of the parallel arrangements we're setting up for chemicals, which are making it exactly clear that the divergence is already being built into the new trading arrangements, the new regulatory bodies. I think the key thing that we're still waiting to see play out is the issue of services, because of course we are primarily trading in services. That's 80% of our trade. And there have been letters of agreement around the city. Things are in principle that we're going to have some form of passporting equivalence, and yet the trade is already moving in large quantities. I looked at a figure and I thought $1 billion of money, of capital, had been shifted. I had to read it again to see that it's $1 trillion that has been shifted to the European Union. So fairly major impacts there as financial folk move money, move people, move operations to avoid non-tariff barrier friction. I think the third point I'd want to make on the friction is that in leaving the EU, being part of a bloc, we largely could ignore the differences between one country and another. The advantage of a single market is that you can produce one set of paperwork for your goods or your services and trade them across the entire bloc. The loss of membership, of single market and customs union membership, means that we actually now have to focus on meeting the precise third country terms, not for the bloc, but for all 27 countries in the bloc. I want to come on lastly, Alan, I'm probably running over my time.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
The three key areas that are going to be discussed in detail, and the areas where I, as a layman in these specialist fields, am particularly interested in having answers to questions. Linda is going to talk about Incoterms, the terms of trade that the chambers of commerce have set up internationally. I think this is the extraordinary level of form filling, and you see photographs of the pages and pages of forms that need to be filled in order to be able to trade into Europe. And of course, at the moment, we are not imposing any of these trading terms on imports. And so much business is about both importing and exporting. I think tucked away as a question under Incoterms is also the rules of origin, which will make many businesses have serious difficulty in bringing materials in and then claiming it's a British product and selling without tariffs. The moment rules of origin are breached, then you're back to selling with the full tariffs, because essentially it's considered primarily to be a product from outside the EU and not part of the TCA. So I have quite a number of questions for Linda, on which I would love to have some answers, as I expect you will too. William's going to talk about VAT, and there are two issues around VAT. One is that it's not enough to have COVID. We've also got to avoid the 2-year extra gap that we were going to be given. But also HMRC has decided to widen the net for VAT. So I'd like to understand more about why that net has been widened and what its implications are. The other thing is that because we're no longer part of the European Union, instead of trading and simply doing paper transactions, we now need to move the VAT cash. So that's a significant amount of money that needs to move at the point of trade and then be accounted for at the end of the VAT quarter. That is a whole cash flow issue that was not really a worry while we were within the European Union. So I would very much like some answers on that. And then Junaid is going to talk about freight. And this is probably the key area where the small players are being deeply disadvantaged. But it isn't just the small players. I mean, there's a whole business model that people were offering sales online from the UK, and Europe was essentially just a postage rate away. So you could treat the whole of Europe as your home market, just pop it in the post and done. Now, not because of tariffs, but because of the non-tariff barriers, that process of simply putting it in the post is nothing like as simple as it was. A, there's the friction, the time that's taken, but B, besides that uncertainty, there are additional costs. We are no longer, if we're in that model, anything like as competitive as we were. There's the, is it the Cheshire Cheese Company that is probably the most famous example at the moment? They were wrapping up individual parcels to send out to people all across Europe, and their business was growing rapidly. They're now having to think about setting up a separate distribution point in Europe, putting the money and the investment in there into that entity, and simply exporting full pallets. preferably full containers, across to that European distribution point. So that is work and taxes lost to the European Union. One could say it's the small companies, but not that I shop any longer at Liberty's, but I understand they're now saying that they won't send a package to anywhere in Europe. They've cut off that element of their trade. So it isn't just small companies that had a business model, and there are all sorts of them across the arts and so on. It is the big companies too that used to be able to treat the European Union as their home market, and that is all gone. So I think the issues around how we manage, particularly for small businesses, to get the loads made up so that they are economically viable is very much the area that we want to press Junaid on today. There are the terms groupage and cabotage, and I'm sure we will get a full explanation of those subtleties. And I think that's really where I think I've said more than enough. I want to hear now from the experts.
I'm going to add another little comment into that as well. I saw a little bit in the news this morning about a little Greek island called Delos, and it was set up by the Romans as a trading area to try and take business away from roads in Greece, and it was set up as a free trade zone. And it was so successful that it grew the word desolation, because that's what it did to trade in roads. So what are we going to do on a more positive note? I should also say to everybody on today's webinar, happy St. George's Day, happy Earth Day. We're glad we're all not traveling places. We are being a bit more environmentally friendly to do this. And before Linda kicks off, I've got a fun little fact today. Approximately, there are 64 million emails that unnecessarily are sent round to everybody in the UK. And if we all send one less email per day, that can save the equivalent of 16,000 tonnes of carbon per annum, which is the equivalent of 3,000 diesel cars on our roads. So instead of sending an email back to somebody each time saying, thanks for the email, I've received it, have a thought for that. All of these information data is has a power source somewhere to save it all, and that's what it's churning out. Anyway, on a lighter note, over to you, Linda. Welcome to the river banks, the banks of the River Thames in Westminster, and please give us the views of Incoterms, how it's changed and how it can affect people trading with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I think that I'm getting most of those 63 million emails. Moving on, however. Good morning, everybody. My name is Linda Bazant. I'm a barrister and an international trade consultant. And this morning I'm going to be talking to you about the new Incoterms 2020. Incoterms, what are Incoterms? There are 11 Incoterms rules. The Incoterms rules describe obligations, delivery, risk, and costs, but Incoterms are not the contract of sale, and that's very important to remember. So what the Incoterms rules do cover are obligations, risks, and costs. What the Incoterms rules do not cover are the contract of sale. They're not the specification of the goods. They don't cover payment. They don't cover breaches of contract, sanctions, tariffs, and prohibitions, or title and ownership to the goods. So you need to incorporate Incoterms into your contract of sale by making sure that they are clearly worded, that the correct Incoterm is used, as in mentioning 2020, the year is crucial, and that you have within the contract of sale the named port, place, or point of delivery. So delivery risks and costs. So who's responsible for delivery or moving the goods? Well, that can be the buyer or the seller. So Incoterms define who will incur delivery costs, what constitutes delivery, and the point at which risk passes. Now, a lot of businesses are using Ex Works and have been doing when we were with the EU, but that's changing very slightly. And the recommendation is that you should use FCA now rather than Ex Works. And the reason for that is that Ex Works, the buyer comes to your warehouse, if you will, and picks up the goods that you have ready for them. So it's their responsibility to collect the goods from you and then ship them off themselves. But the issues around that are, if it's on a pallet, it may be that the driver then has to use your forklift. Are they insured in the forklift? What if they cause damage in your warehouse when they are putting the goods onto the truck? And also, with regard to export documentation, it's all very well to say, well, that's the responsibility of the buyer, but the person with all of the information for export is the seller. And the seller also needs to see sight of the documentation to confirm that the goods have indeed been exported. So FCA is a better option now for sellers, which makes the seller responsible for the loading of the goods at the seller's premises or the named place, and the customs formalities for export. But the buyer, on the other hand, is responsible for main transportation and delivery, customs formalities at import, payment of duties and taxes, and unloading at destination. Now, very similarly, a lot of EU customers are insisting that we deliver duty paid, DDP, which means that the seller bears all of the costs and all of the risks. The issues around that are not just the costs and the risks, but you've also got to negotiate local politics, strikes possibly within that country, all of that sort of thing. And also the politics that are going in between our government and various EU parties at the moment, which shouldn't really spill over onto us as traders, but they do, and that always causes a problem. So although Simon was talking earlier about the friction, a lot of the friction seems to be our politicians rather than the companies that are trying to do business with each other, I think. However, as an alternative to DDP, you could use DAP, delivered at place, or DPU, delivered place unloaded, as alternatives to DDP. In these cases, the seller is responsible for loading the goods, customs formalities at export, main transportation and delivery to the named place, or ready for unloading at the named place. And the buyer is responsible for customs formalities at import, payment of the duty and taxes, and unloading at destination. So in summary, the Incoterms set out the roles and the responsibilities of the seller and the buyer. They cover delivery, risk, and costs. The Incoterms are not the contract of sale, but they should be incorporated into your contract of sale. And using the wrong Incoterms could be very costly to you. So it's very important that all staff connected with the sale understand about Incoterms. So you don't really want your salespeople agreeing to DDP terms when really you are more set up, especially from a cost point of view, for perhaps FCA. So make absolutely certain that everybody in your chain understands how Incoterms work. And if in doubt, take advice. And I'm aware that there are issues with regard to VAT, but I believe that William Morrison is going to be giving you a lot of hints and tips around that, and perhaps being able to uncover some of the issues that are coming up around VAT. And of course, the smaller packages that we're delivering will be picked up by the freight delivery that you're going to get later. So thank you very much for listening. Obviously, we're having a Q&A at the end. So I will now hand back to Alan. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very, very much, Linda. I must admit, I've had a look at William Morris's presentation, and he's got a little bit of coverage of Incoterms in there with some slides to make it a bit clearer of what Lisa has more than adequately described in very clear terms. Thank you. I should also say it's also very difficult when you're a small company, you're selling online, mainly to the UK through things like Amazon. And then Amazon tell you that it's their policy that you can only sell to people in the EU on delivered duty paid terms. So it's not sometimes an exporter's choice how they sell and their Incoterms. It's the force that's put on them by the carrier that they use. And if they use people like the post office rather than Amazon, they could sell free carrier, which in essence is taking your product round to the post office and giving it to them. And on that note, William Morris is our main speaker today. His company are specialists in VAT for trade in the EU and beyond. William, don't forget you're on mute at the moment, polite reminder. All conversations seem to start off on that note these days, I'm not sure why. But the mic is passed over to you for your main presentation this morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Good morning, everyone. So Alan was kind enough to introduce me very well, but I'll just add a couple of bits of more detail about Essentia. We are a international VAT advisory and outsourcing firm, and our USP is basically to offer people who have cross-border VAT problems, perhaps cropping up in a number of different countries. They might not even be particularly complex problems, but they're problems that crop up in a number of different environments, to solve them and also to take the burden of local VAT compliance out of your hands in a cost-effective manner if you do find yourself having to register for VAT in EU countries, submit customs declarations in EU countries, and do that sort of tax admin, which I think a lot of people are finding they're much more likely to have to do now that they have third country status and have lost a lot of the protections of the single market when they're trading into the European Union. I think one introductory comment that, well, two introductory comments that I would make quickly before going on to my slides are, firstly, sadly, I'm actually old enough. Those of you who see me on camera probably won't believe this, looking at that 21-year-old in front of them. But sadly, I'm old enough to have worked in VAT before we went into the single market. So my career is kind of coming full circle a bit. I'm giving clients a lot of the type of advice that I was giving to them right at the beginning of my career, back in the late 1980s. But the one big difference is the democratization of international trade that has happened since then. We had the issues that I'm about to present to you in my slides are issues that loads of my clients had back in 1989, 1990. Not much has changed in that sense. But what has changed is that back in those days, I was talking to General Motors or Unilever or British Aerospace about these sort of things, because these were the people who were the international traders. We now have that has been completely democratized now. And we now have a whole raft of small businesses and even sole proprietorships who are doing transactions that would have been the province of British Aerospace and Unilever back then. So stuff that actually makes sense for companies of that size, of course, because they've got all of their admin departments and specialist skills and everything, can obviously be a big challenge to apply in practice for smaller businesses. And in essence, that's where we're here to help. So I will go onto my share screen.
While you're doing that, William, it's just sprung to my mind that there's a very famous Scotch whisky called VAT 69. Do you have any idea why it's called 69? 1969?
I had it that it was just that it was VAT number 69 that they brewed it in. I nearly said, my God, that could get me in trouble. That they distill it from. But I am aware of that. That's been given out as a birthday and Christmas present 1 or 2 times in our firm. Yes, but it's nothing to do with us.
Right. Okay. Nothing to do with the value-added tax.
No. And so certainly VAT is not going up to 69% or anything like that. I hope we at least. So let's have a look at what I'm going to focus on today. Everybody can see my screen clearly, I take it. Getting thumbs up there from Alan. In a sense, I'm going to Incoterms are so important that although my brief wasn't particularly to talk about them, I can't talk about cross-border trade in goods with that without coming back and it being an Incoterms presentation as well. So I'm going to re-stress the importance of what Linda was saying earlier on Incoterms. Then have a look at some common Brexit, VAT and customs issues that our clients have been bringing to us and how we've gone about solving them. Let's have a look at the impact of Incoterms on VAT and indeed customs law. There's no direct application of Incoterms in the VAT law. There's no part of either the UK or EU VAT law that says, look, if you deliver DDP, the following happens. They're never really mentioned. But what they do is that they have an indirect effect because they lay out the responsibilities of the seller or the buyer to perform certain tasks, among which are prominently customs formalities. And those responsibilities in turn then kick on to leading to having to local VAT compliance obligations and things like that. So Incoterms have no direct effect, but have a very, very strong indirect effect on what you're going to need to do from a VAT point of view. And I think we're seeing a lot of people coming back to a point that was made earlier about everybody's got to be familiar with the Incoterms in the business. I think a lot of businesses have been quite free and easy with their Incoterms in the era of the single market. You know what, we can deliver DDP, DAP, DDU, doesn't really matter, you know, we'd still zero rate the supply because it's an intra-EU cross-border supply. What's the problem? Well, once you start crossing customs borders and your VAT obligations start being driven by who does the customs formalities, then Incoterms start to have a very strong effect. Quick look at an old Incoterms chart as to, obviously there are the very different ranges of Incoterms and the different point at which responsibility for the goods passes from seller to buyer, ranging from Ex Works where you're passing responsibility to the buyer at your factory gate and the buyer pretty much does everything in terms of shipment and customs, through to DDP at the other end where the coin's flipped and you're essentially delivering to their premises, having done everything, and a whole series of ones in between. I think from a VAT point of view, the critical thing are the 2 red lines, which are the point in the process of the shipment of export customs declaration and who's responsible for that, and import customs declaration and who's responsible for that. I guess the kind of default setting that one would have in one's mind, if one was coming fresh to cross-border transactions in a customs environment, is that the exporter does the export declaration, dealing with their authority at their end, HMRC in our case. The importer does the import declaration at the other end and sorts out everything with their authority, and everything would work smoothly, and that's how it's kind of almost nature would suppose it to happen. And from a VAT and customs point of view, so long as you're delivering on one of the Incoterms where that gap between the dark blue of the seller and the light blue of the buyer passes between those red lines, then more or less you're getting that smooth outcome. But it does throw up 2 key problem Incoterms from a VAT point of view. Ex Works creates a problem for the buyer because the buyer is taking possession of goods in a foreign country and having to be the exporter. And what that normally means is you're going to have a customs account, an AORI number, and probably going to have to VAT register in that country as well. Or if there are some circumstances in which you can avoid that, there's a lot of work to be done to avoid it, but it is at face value a problem. The other problem one down at the bottom is DDP, where it flips the other side of the import red line, and there the seller now has the difficulty, because since they've taken responsibility for the whole thing, including import into the buyer's country, the seller becomes responsible for VAT administration in that country, and potentially you become VAT registrable in the country of your customer and in a number of different countries if you have a number of different customers. So in our world, ex-works and DDP are the two Incoterms that really are the front runners in creating VAT problems, especially DDP, which I'll focus on a little bit now. I should have given that slide before, buyer's problem and seller's problem. So let's have a look at some common problems and that have come from clients and how they've reacted to them, and how the Incoterms and perhaps the delivery terms interact with those. So we get clients saying, I'm sending goods to the EU on a business-to-business basis. Can I still zero rate the sale? In the old days, within the single market, you could zero rate a business-to-business sale within the EU, so long as you captured the customer's VAT number and quoted it on your invoice. And the answer is yes, you can still zero rate those sales, but now you're the exporter, so there's customs formalities to go through. So you or your logistics company has to create either a Form C88 to export the goods by normal customs processes, or a CN22 or 23 when you're sending by post, in order to clear the goods for export, but also that export clearance is your evidence that you have to keep for HMRC to show that you can zero rate the goods. The next one, I'm sending goods to the EU B2C. Do I apply UK VAT? Well, those of you who sold B2C cross-border in the past would have probably remembered that the default setting for B2C transactions was that you had to charge UK VAT, even if it was a foreign customer. There's kind of some good news and some bad news for that. Now that we're outside the single market, the only thing that HMRC cares about is, have the goods been exported? Have they left the UK and been properly accounted for and properly declared? If so, you can zero rate whatever you're doing with them, whether you're selling them B2B, B2C, or even in some cases not selling them at all. So that in essence is a slight simplification. But the bad news, unfortunately, is what happens if you're selling B2C at the other end, because you can get caught in a little bit of a trap between a good customer buying experience, but a lot of admin for you as a seller, or a bad, not much admin for you as a seller, but a bad customer buying experience. So let's just imagine a situation where we are selling goods B2C into the Netherlands. At the moment, in the past, you'd have just charged UK VAT to a Dutch B2C customer. Now you can zero rate from the UK, you declare it with HMRC at customs. But the other side, when it arrives in the Netherlands, you have Dutch customs waiting, and it has to be declared at Dutch customs and VAT and possibly duty as well paid before the package gets released. So what that can mean is that if you are sending it on Incoterms where you are not responsible for the importation, Incoterms like, I don't know, DAP instead of DDP, then the customer ends up being responsible for the VAT, which can lead to a pretty poor customer buying experience when, instead of getting a parcel they get the dreaded little red or yellow, probably in the Netherlands, card in their mailbox saying, please come down the post office and pay the following, because you have to pay extra VAT and duty before we're going to release the parcel to you. So a lot of online retailers find that that's not an adequate customer buying experience these days, and they've got to do something to ease that issue. Well, you can ease that issue by delivering DDP. That means that you meet all the VAT and duty liabilities, and the customer just gets their parcel delivered into their hands. But the downside of that is that when you deliver DDP into a territory, because you are now, for want of a better word, the custodian of those goods from a tax point of view, within that territory, having been the importer, you will have to VAT register in that territory, because your sale post-import is a local domestic VATable sale. So in this case, you could be the importer of record, do all the customs clearance with the Dutch customs, but then you'd have to register for Dutch VAT and charge Dutch VAT to the customer when you sell the goods onwards, which means, of course, a lot of Dutch VAT admin and also capturing and applying the Dutch VAT rate. It does have the advantage that the import VAT that you pay is recoverable as a credit in that VAT return, just as you would recover credits in your local VAT return in the UK. So I think online retailers can find that an attractive way of doing things from a customer buying experience, or at least, shall I say, large online retailers who've got the amount of admin capability to deal with things like registrations in the Netherlands. However, of course, coming back to the point that as a third country, you've now got to interact not just with EU customs, but you've got to interact with customs in every single country that you're shipping to. If you start to ship EU-wide on a DDP basis, the admin starts to multiply very, very quickly, because it's okay supplying your Dutch customer. Maybe the Netherlands is quite friendly. They're not that hard to register for VAT, and they're quite helpful. But if you ship to Germany, France, Denmark, etc., you potentially are being an importer and VAT registrable in all of those different countries. That rapidly becomes an intolerable burden. We deal with online retailers that range from Amazon traders on their computer up in their bedroom, up to the world's largest TV shopping channel, and literally nobody that we've dealt with has ever chosen to go down the DDP route so far, that they're delivering DDP into every single EU country, because the burden of 27 odd VAT registrations is in those cases is simply too high. So you have the chance between a nightmare for you and everything's fine for your customer, or a difficult time for your customer and everything's fine for you. That means that people have to try and strike a bit of a balance there. How people would normally start doing that are perhaps choose favoured markets. So you might think to yourself, look, I ship heaps of stuff to Ireland. So my Irish customer base, I'm going to go DDP and look after them, and I'll put up with the Irish admin in order to help them. But you know what? I'm sorry, my Estonian market base are just going to have to look after themselves, because they're just not that important to me. Possibly you can change distribution flows within the EU. You can remove all of those multiple registration things by having a single point of import into the EU, and then delivery out of that single point within the single market, so you're back in the single market rules. But of course, that means you'd have to change your shipment flows and no longer deliver direct, but deliver through some sort of central clearing point, which has its own cost implications. There are some couriers that offer a special thing called enhanced DAP, where the customer is the importer of record, not you. So you don't have the VAT registration liability, but you engage your courier to look after everything for the customer, so that they have a smooth experience. That's a possibility. You know, the difficulty with it is the courier ends up doing a lot of work, which means that some don't do it at all. For instance, none of the post offices, Royal Mail or Parcel Force or anything would do this. And the more premium couriers who do it will tend to charge, you know, a significant amount of money for it. So it can only be sometimes of use in higher value transactions. So really, there's a bit of a kind of spanner in the works for cross-border retail, and there's no single pain-free option for retailers. It's a matter of choosing which compromise is the most doable and creates the least pain. One thing I would say, going back to my previous slide with the multiple countries, I focused here on B2C, on retailers, but if you're a B2B supplier, generally you're going to have the same problem with deliver duty paid, simply that it's more likely that you're going to be able to wriggle out of it, because if you've got B2B customers, it's more likely that they're willing to be the importer of record and that you may be able to get away with delivering DAP rather than DDP. Of course, it's not certain, and if you have a customer base that insists on delivering duty paid, then even though you're B2B, you're still in this scenario that the retailer would have suffered from as well. So that's something to consider. I could talk for a long time on DDP, since it involves quite a lot of our lives at the moment, sorting out DDP issues. But I know that we're quite time constrained, so I will gallop on. Some other common problems that clients come to us with: supposing you are committed to some sort of DDP delivery, let's say in Belgium, and so you have to be the importer of record of goods over there, and your shipper tells you, well, you need an AORI number. We've had a lot of clients coming to us saying, oh, well, that's great, I've got an AORI number, I can give them that. Well, you've got a UK AORI number. The UK AORI numbers are not valid in the EU anymore. And so if you're importing something into Antwerp and presenting before Dutch, that would upset the Belgians, before Belgian customs, then you would need a Belgian AORI number, or at least an AORI number from some EU state in order to do that. So if you are going to present before EU customs, that EU customs AORI number needs to be sorted out, because the goods either will not clear without it, or if they will clear, your shipper may give their own AORI number just to get the goods through. But if they do that and it's on the shipper's account rather than yours, in most countries you'll have very great difficulty ever reclaiming the VAT that you've suffered on that import, because it's in the wrong person's name. We've had, interestingly, more than once, we've had clients come to us with questions about buying and selling goods entirely within the European community. And on a couple of occasions, they've said, I buy and sell and buy goods and then resell them in, let's say, Germany. I called HMRC and they said, after Brexit, that's all VAT free now. So is that okay? Am I in the clear? Well, HMRC will tell you about the UK side of things. It's buying and selling goods in Germany is certainly UK VAT free, but it's not German VAT free. if you buy and resell goods domestically within the EU now, you will almost certainly become VAT registrable in that country, and will have to implement a VAT registration and charge local VAT. I thought I'd also mention quickly, I'm galloping on very quickly here because I know we've got very little time, some issues with the UK-EU free trade agreement. Not strictly VAT, but it's something that's cropping up with customs duty with a lot of our clients having some difficulties with it. I think everybody thought that the free trade agreement would be kind of the bit of the end of the movie where suddenly at the besieged fort you hear the bugles coming and the cavalry are riding to the rescue. Unfortunately, it's not, and never would have been the panacea that people had expected. I think there were two difficulties in expectation, and in fairness to the people who were negotiating this free trade agreement, I don't think either of these things were ever promised, but they've simply been, expectations ran away a bit. Firstly, that the free trade agreement would sort out VAT issues. That was never the intention, and VAT has never been a negotiating point, even from day one. You know, almost from 2016, it has been pretty much inevitable that we would be outside the EU VAT system, and so the free trade agreement was never going to ameliorate that. It's really about tariff barriers mainly, a few non-tariff barriers as well, but mainly a customs thing. But the other thing that have surprised people is that they anticipated that it would mean we could always ship goods duty-free from the UK to the EU and vice versa, but it's not the case. The free trade agreement implements zero duty and tariff rates for originating product. So if you have good stuff that originates in the UK, typically means it's been manufactured here, then you can claim those zero rates. But if it doesn't originate, if for instance you are somebody who sources stuff from China, does a little bit of work in it in the UK and then sends it onwards, then there's no free trade agreement protection. Those goods will be suffering the normal duty rates when they hit the EU border. And that's been a big thing for our clients. I would say a lot of our clients are suffering from Brexit. One or two are benefiting, I have to be fair, but most are suffering. But very few are suffering enough in order to actually relocate their whole business. But the two clients I'm dealing with at the moment who are relocating because of this issue, that if they are adding value to Chinese or US origin products in the UK, the duty cost when it then hits the EU border with enhanced value but no UK origin is a major issue, and that they are choosing now to open up and add that value direct in the EU instead, import the raw material directly to the EU and work on it there. And unfortunately, that's not a glitch in the system. That's the intention of the system. Customs duties, the intention of EU customs duties are to bring stuff onshore and to make adding value outside the EU more troublesome. So I've covered a couple of things. As I said, if you distribute Chinese goods from a UK warehouse, they'll now have an EU VAT cost when they come into the EU that you may have to deal with. They'll also have a UK VAT cost, duty cost when they come into the UK. So you would face duty twice. That's mitigable. Some reliefs exist in the EU for goods that you're importing and re-exporting. So you'd be able to relieve the UK end of the cost at the cost of a little bit of extra admin. But the EU duty cost will still be there. So this whole issue with origin is a big problem for people. The other common problem with origin is that I get clients who are saying, look, my stuff's made in the UK, but I sent it and they charge duty. The critical thing about origin is it has to be properly declared. So there are provisions within the free trade agreement to say that up to, I believe it's €6,000 of value, you have to do an invoice-based declaration. You have to declare them to be of UK origin in the proper form. And above that, you need a thing called an EUR1 certificate in order to verify origin. A lot of UK stuff is actually suffering duty at the moment when it's hitting the EU border, not because it wouldn't qualify, but simply because nobody's made the appropriate declaration and the paperwork isn't in place. And coming back to the earlier friction point, I think at the moment, hopefully this will get better as people get used to working with things going forward. But at the moment, one of the big areas is, in addition to the necessary problems with the customs process, there are a lot of unnecessary problems where actually the customs process would work, but the paper hasn't been filled in properly, it hasn't been done properly, and that comes back to kind of the friction point, shall we say. So dealing with cross-border problems, I think review your product flows and anticipate what problems you're going to face. I'm going to plug the government's grant scheme at the moment. There's free money out there for people to obtain customs advice and customs training. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that and see if that can help you gear yourself up in that regard. Identify your new compliance obligations and then weigh them up with a kind of beady commercial eye as to, okay, it's not, even if these are not the end of the world, what is the degree of, how much does that increase the cost of me doing this particular transaction? And is this particular transaction still viable for me now? And how do I come to a compromise that's perhaps not ideal customer experience, not ideal experience for me, but is tolerable for each and has a tolerable VAT and compliance cost. So that's the end of the presentation. I galloped through it, unfortunately, because it's always the case that I overrun. And my apologies, Alan, if I've done so.
No, you haven't. You're, in fact, 11 o'clock is bang on the whistle of when you were due
fantastic.
to. I should say congratulations, an enormous military precision.
Very good, thank you.
So I'm going to run through a short presentation as well, in place of Junaid, who doesn't look like he's going to be able to make it today. So I'm going to talk through a little about who I am, what Hounslow, West London Local Chambers, the West London Export Club and West London Business are doing to help exporters in the West London area. I'm a Queen's Award for Export winner in the past. I'm also a British Exporter Chamber of Commerce member. I'm the won an award with Sally for doing best support for exporting from the British Energy and Industrial Strategy Department. So we're quite well versed on being able to help people. And today's webinar was about Incoterms, VAT and export freight and cargo trade flow issues. The trade and cooperation agreement we had with the EU is a huge document that we've got. It's only partially finished and it's bringing up lots of problems. So what are the residual results from those for the first quarter of this year? We've been reading news headlines recently that have said that so some very upbeat messages trying to say that the sales to the EU have rebounded after January slump. One of the headlines I picked up said that EU sales have jumped by 46% following January's 42% slump. Well, those are very nice numbers, but the mathematician in me said, if you take 100 as a round number and take a 42% slump off that, you've got 58. And if you add an increase of 46% onto 58, you get 85, which means we're still 15% way down on where we were this time last year. So please don't try and con us with some very big percentages numbers. We can see through them. Also, I spotted that UK imports from the EU rose by 7.3% in February after dropping 29% the month before. Again, similar numbers. If you have 100 as your key number, you take 29% off it, you've got 70. You add 7.3% onto it again, you're up to 75. So UK imports from the EU are only at 75% of where they were a year ago. So in a way, our exports are beginning to do a little bit better than EU imports into the UK, but we need to watch out for these. And in total, non-EU February exports fell by 10%. So we've got some big numbers we're lagging behind in the first couple of months of this year. I picked up on the BBC from the ONS, a graph showing where imports and exports have moved down and a little bit up too, which shows the numbers in a better way. But it's interesting, you go into a bit more detail with this. I know our previous speakers have mentioned about issues that we've had with fish. And I got a comment last week from one of my friends in UKEF saying that before we left the EU, a fish caught in UK waters took 12 hours before it was delivered and put on a plate in the EU somewhere. That's now at least 2 days or longer, giving a time problem. That results in costs, in documentation, which has increased dramatically. And on a meat note, I managed to find this graph. The top 2 slides in grey are what had to happen before we left the EU. Now all of the red slides and the blue slides are all the documentation that we have to complete to try and get our meat on a plate and to arrive somewhere in the EU. These aren't small problems, they're horrendous 23-point level journey to get across. I also picked up these slides that show on the top left what the result in export of cars have changed. It's only down 5.9% year on year, and medical products 5.5%. But if you look on the bottom left-hand corner, meat and dairy products are down 33%, and fish and shellfish down 22% year on year. And what's more, shellfish on the bottom right-hand number are now, sales are lower than they were over 11 years ago. And the same with meat and dairy products and live animals are way lower than they were 11 years ago. We can't carry on like this. We have to come up with a solution. This has largely resulted in the UK has historically been the EU's been the largest EU's export partner for many, many years. But in February, for the first time, that figure dropped below 50% to 49%, and makes a huge difference to our balance of payments as well. William alluded a little bit to this. We can talk a bit about the imbalance of containers globally. During COVID, there were a lot of PPE shipments sent over to the UK. Those containers weren't sent back. We had an evergreen vessel that got stuck. We've now got congestion in ports. We've got questionable economics of shipping. And globalization as we know it, could this be over? Is this going to mean result going back to more domestic trade? And I picked up a few more graphs showing trade going back to the EU to 2010 in the top left-hand corner. We are, as you can see, for total exports now down 12.5% year on year, but back to over 11 years ago back. But our trade with the rest of the world is still quite buoyant. back only 5 years to 5 years ago's figures. These are all sort of quite interesting points. But how much of this is due to COVID and the pandemic? We've all been on lockdown. It's not just in the UK. We've seen the news in the EU. We've seen the news in India. And what we haven't seen is a lot of news from China. There are major Chinese cities and ports and regions that are on lockdown today. Those aren't coming out. What we're being told, though, is that the UK and other major countries are due to have a resultant buoyancy either next year or the year after with 5% plus growth, which is unheard of in the UK. A result of COVID and the impact of COVID is there are a lot of delayed and cancelled orders with Linda's a barrister by trade in a lot more sense than just Incoterms, that there's this wonderful phrase called force majeure starting to come out, and force majeure and COVID aren't necessarily covered. So please watch the blueprint very carefully, the small print very, very carefully. There's also an awful lot of people with increased stock holding that results in increased costs. There's also, if you look overseas in some of the new developing markets, it's very difficult to do credit searches and company searches on companies in South America, in Africa, in India and Asia. But there is government support on credit insurance, and the fast growth sectors are FMCG and ICT. I think you've probably had enough of these graphs from me. The key thing I'd like to say, though, at the end is that there's becoming a diversification of supply chains. The viability of manufacturers and suppliers is being changed dramatically from goods being imported in from the Far East and being manufactured here, dependent on what the application of the goods are, whether you've got an electric car or a diesel car will change on the import duty regulations and the certificates of origin that you can have. There's a huge change in the flow of billions of worth of cargo coming from Asia. Local supply is being phrased as reshoring, or there's a greater reliance on technology. So there's a lot changing on supply chains. We've heard about supply contracts. We've heard about Incoterms today. We need to think a bit more about transport methods, because there are the system is getting clogged up in the supply chain at British ports and European ports. And we did a poll recently where we asked, have you changed your supply chain due to COVID or Brexit? And we got some interesting results where a lot of people have, but equally a lot of other people haven't so far. It's a bit of a 50-50 split. The key thing that I would say from today is watch out for the growing amount of free ports, otherwise known as free trade zones, outside the UK that are starting to come about. Heathrow has applied for associated free port status. There are 10 free ports that have been announced in the Chancellor's budget. It will make a huge difference of goods being imported in from Asia that are repackaged and then in part exported out into the EU, because they won't come into free circulation in the UK, which means you don't have to pay UK import duty or UK VAT until they clear the free port and come into the UK. And then you'll only have to pay European VAT and European import duty once if you export them from the free port in to the EU, where there'll be goods in free circulation. That's the end of my short presentation. I managed to do that in 12 minutes. Okay, not so bad. We've got a couple now of really good questions that I've spotted coming through, and I've saved these to the end. Monica Sangerman has asked a good question. In part, it's going to be focused a bit more on yourself, William, and a little to yourself, Linda. The question is, for people that can't see it, I have a very specific question. I import goods from Slovenia, EU. and I currently have a customer in Ukraine. So they are selling the goods as a UK company. They're being manufactured in Slovenia and they're being exported directly from Slovenia to Ukraine. Goods will be shipped directly from our manufacturer in Slovenia to Ukraine and sold on an ex-works basis. Now, Moj has been advised by her accountants in the UK that in order to do this, she needs to apply for a VAT number in Slovenia, as goods will not actually go through the UK. Or my manufacturer in Slovenia, and this is where we're getting mixed messages from people in overseas countries, and the manufacturer in Slovenia says, should I invoice my clients in Ukraine directly without the UK company being involved, and then pay them while we invoice the manufacturer for the difference in cost of the sales price? My thought on it would be Slovenia is inside the EU and it's an export from the EU going to Ukraine. So long as the Slovenian manufacturer has an export document showing the goods are going to a company outside the EU, even though they're invoicing us in the UK, again outside the EU, VAT shouldn't be involved. But I'll ask this first of all over to William, and then I'll come over to Linda to see if Incoterms need to be invoked at this point.
Okay. I will apologise in advance to Linda because I simply cannot answer from a VAT point of view without also invoking Incoterms first.
Yes. At the moment, X works.
Yes, exactly. And I think this is the problem. So what we've got is obviously, as you say, it's an export from the EU and then an import to the Ukraine. With an ex-works supply that is leaving the UK buyer to be the exporter from the Slovenia, because the Slovenian company has disavowed its liability to be exporter by virtue of the ex-works terms. So if the UK company wants to be exporter from Slovenia, it is going to need a Slovenian VAT registration, and it is going to need a Slovenian AORI number as well to present before Slovenian customs. Some countries, I don't know about Slovenia, but I suspect it will be one of them, also insist that customs declarant is established within the community. So you may well require the assistance of a customs agent who's established within the European community to file the export declaration in Slovenia as well. So the long and the short of it is that, yes, by buying ex-works in Slovenia, you have potentially saddled yourself with considerable amount of Slovenian admin. The difficulty, I guess, is where VAT meets commerciality, because purely from a VAT advisor point of view, the easiest thing I would be to say is, well, can you persuade or charm or bribe or whatever your Slovenian supplier to be the exporter of record, and then if your Ukrainian customer can be the importer of record, then congratulations, you've washed your hands of VAT obligations altogether. You've slipped through the crack in the middle. The difficulty commercially with that, of course, is that if your supplier is filing the export documentation, that's going to arrive with the goods in the Ukraine, and your customer as the importer is then going to have transparency on who your supplier is and what the pricing is. So it may be to your commercial interests to go through the pain of stepping in to be the exporter as well. So there's kind of that angle to consider as well.
Linda, what would you like to add to that?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, Alan, I think that in a nutshell, William has come up with all the goods. I don't really have anything more to add to that. I agree with him with regard to the issues around Slovenia and checking on all of the rules and regulations for that particular area. But with regard to VAT, obviously I bow to William's superior knowledge.
So are you saying that the best payment terms, if they can get it, would be CFR?
Difficult again because of the Slovenian issue. I think that we need a bit more information. This is quite a complex question to be dealing with here. So I think that would really be something we need to go away and have a look at and map out to see what the alternatives are.
Okay. William, if you're the exporter on record, are you able to be the exporter on record, but the commercial invoice that goes can go from the UK company as the people that are selling the goods? So
yes,
on the one hand, you can be the exporter on the export documents, but on the payment side, you can be the person who's receiving the payment in the UK.
I think the commercial invoice can come from the UK, it's no problem, but the UK would then have to be the exporter of record.
Right, okay.
In Slovenia. And the consequence of that is that you need a Slovenian VAT registration and Slovenian AORI number.
Okay, because the goods are going out of the country and you need to show export documentation. Okay, so we've got a question as well from Hemel Adalja. Do we require VAT registration in all EU countries in order to ship the goods via courier or on a delivered duty paid DDP basis? We will be charging the customer DDP and paying the courier charges in the UK.
At the moment, if you are delivering B2C EU-wide on a DDP basis, then you will be generating a theoretical VAT registration liability in every single country that you're delivering DDP into. There's practicality as well, because I'll be honest with you, if you've made 100 quid's worth of delivery into Malta, the Maltese are not going to be coming chasing you, for 20 quid's worth of Maltese VAT. So there's a materiality angle here. But in principle, if you're doing significant amounts of business DDP into a state, then you will be certainly VAT registrable there if you are B2C. In some states, if you're doing B2B, there is particular reliefs that you can slough off the liability to your customer by a special reverse charge, but only in some. So for instance, you could do that in the Netherlands, but not in Germany, or you could do it in Belgium, but not in Ireland. But the long and the short of it is that you will, whichever way you do, B2C or B2B, you certainly have to look at it, because you are putting yourself at the risk or possibly the certainty of multiple VAT registrations.
Is there a way to avoid multiple VAT registrations to set up a virtual office somewhere in the EU, and then you can charge, and then your VAT registered from that virtual office? You don't need to physically be there. You can just have that as a virtual name and address and VAT details.
That can work if you are selling services. I haven't really gone into services because lack of time. So I thought this would be more goods focused. But unfortunately, when you're selling goods, the VAT liability kind of sticks to the goods and where do they go and where do they travel to, more than it sticks to who owns them. So to be honest, if you created, I don't know, a Dutch branch, an address in the Netherlands, but then went and did a DDP import into Ireland, you'd still be VAT registrable in Ireland, because your goods would trigger that liability, not which of your branches owns them.
Right. Okay. So you have to send your goods to Holland, and then the goods have to go from Holland to Ireland.
Exactly. So
you can invoice from Holland to Ireland with VAT sorted, and then it comes back here.
Yes. So those people that are now doing from delivery distribution within the single market, and there are some clients who've done that, have to physically get their distribution point within the single market.
Right.
Which is obviously the thing that can create a little bit of extra hassle and expense.
Okay. A question from Stephanie Shaw is there any organisation that could help us with export customs formalities for each order we're sending to Europe if we move from ex-works Incoterms to FCA in order to have better control, as we do not have an infrastructural knowledge of these formalities in-house? Linda, looks like a good question for yourself. And it looks like we've lost Linda at just the vital moment. Let's see if she comes back again in a moment. I'll pass the next question on from Kathy Oliver. Are those changes going to share? Sorry, the page is going to be shared afterwards. Yes, it's all going to be available on our YouTube channel. You can tune into that. Gemma Teresa Bates asks, we do hire equipment, so temporary exporting, we've had a terrible time with HMRC advisors and the trade support services, both unable to advise on getting things to Northern Ireland even. On the HMRC website, it says most countries have a limit on the value of goods that you can bring in duty-free. Do you know where we can find a list of these countries and what the limit is each for each period and the limits covered, e.g. per shipment or per annum? HMRC doesn't provide, as they only provide UK information, but we'd find it really useful to have. And with procedure... Oh, Linda's got a fire alarm in her building and has to leave. Okay. What an excuse. HMRC don't provide this paperwork or information. It'd be really useful to have independent paperwork for procedures required to send the equipment if under these limits. We do large shipments and would be sending under an ATA carnet, but for the small one-off things, we need to know what that's about. Any ideas, William? Any ideas, Simon?
I'm not really providing an answer here, but I think it was part of my introductory question, and perhaps going back to William, what has really happened with the HMRC widening the net around VAT and the implication for small transactions? And can I couple it a bit further? We're talking about goods here, I know, but much of my work is around websites, online, e-commerce, and particularly e-services. And I think the allowance for e-services got up to £8,000 worth. That is another can of worms, isn't it? And it will be very useful to have some guidance through those areas as well as the small goods transactions. So many businesses being made non-viable by uncertainty first, and then the actual working details and their relative complexity.
So I would say, Gemma, there is a website called Eurostat that you might be able to get some information from on there, looking at it, which is published by the European Commission, who may well be able to give you information on what the limits are per country for yourself. So perhaps you could have a look on there. And I'm trying to run through these questions before we get to the end quickly. Sue Siviat says, UK registered company purchasing equipment, EU origin, delivered from France to the Republic of Ireland. What are the implications? Secondly, same equipment then going on to Northern Ireland. I'm guessing that the Ireland border is just open. The border between Northern Ireland and the UK is across the Irish Sea. Therefore, movement of those goods would be free. Any comments, William?
There's some very special rules for Northern Ireland, which I kept out of the slideshow because I didn't want to, keep you till tea time. But in principle, you can move goods from the UK to Northern Ireland from a VAT point of view as if it's a domestic movement, and would apply normal VAT rules, but you do have to report them via the Trader Support Service. You have to make a declaration which the government is extremely keen to say is not an export declaration, except that it kind of, to all intents and purposes, is an export declaration. So there is paperwork to be done. In terms of moving between Southern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, and the North, they're both within the EU single market. So the consequences of moving goods from Republic to the North are the same as from moving them from the Republic to elsewhere, and they will depend very much on whether you are selling them B2B or B2C, because the single market rules, as you may remember from our time within it, differ from B2B and B2C scenarios. Typically, if you're moving goods from the Republic to the North, it will involve you VAT registering in the Republic, because you'll either be making a B2C transaction, in which case you'll probably have to charge and report Irish VAT, or you'll be making a B2B transaction, which would be VAT free, but you're obliged to VAT register and report the zero rated sale as part of the intra-EU kind of VAT clearance process. It all once you start shipping to the Republic and the North out of the UK, it all gets complicated very fast though. So there's kind of you can almost do a matrix of like a dozen different scenarios, that if it's this, it's that, and that's the outcome. But if it's to the other parallel, you know, if the other thing is different, then it'll have a separate outcome. So happy to, you know, take your email or something and discuss that in more detail. But it's a tough one to get to the bottom of. You know,
it's absolutely okay. So we're getting close to the end of our 11:30 slot. We've got Danella on the line from West London Business. West London Business are doing the next webinar on the 29th about finance with the EU. Danella, would you like to say a few words about that to get some people interested in the event that you're going to be fronting up? Can you take yourself off mute and turn your camera on, please?
Hi, good morning all. Very happy to be here. I'm the Policy and Events Intern at West London Business. Next webinar is on the 29th of April. It's about export trade and finance. And as you can see, we have some very good speakers on the screen. And Rowan, my supervisor, will send you an email with the invite and some information about the webinar.
Please make sure you register. You'll be very welcome. Thank you very much, Danella. Okay, before we finish, I'd like to say a huge thank you very much to Linda. I'll say that separately, but as a matter of public record, she's left the building. It's on fire. William, thank you very much for coming along today. Simon, you've been a pearl of wisdom at the beginning, and a note of what's really going on behind the scenes. But a lot of people don't really want to say too much about that. But unnecessarily, it's really going on out there, and we need to try and get some answers. If there's any other questions that people have that they haven't posted through in the Q&A session, please send them through to me, and I can get them on to some of our presenters today to try and get back to you. It's been really good of you to join us all today. Thank you very, very much, and look out for the next webinar next week on the 29th about how you can get finance for your exports to trade with the EU, given that you've got a lot more bills to pay from export documentation, from VAT, and you need to try and get cash flow moving properly in your business. Thank you all for attending today. It's really good to see you. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.